John, thanks for joining us. Time is flying.
Yeah, it's been a quick show so far.
We enjoyed this segment. What's that?
Let's screw it up with this interview.
We might as well,
It's been a
right?
good show. That's right.
We joined this half hour by two men that I currently serve with. Delegate Joe Ellington is the head of the House Committee on Education. Joe, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
How are you doing today, sir?
Doing good so far, and Happy New Year to you gentlemen.
You've delivered any babies this morning, or are you off today?
No, actually, I retired as of the 31st.
So you were done completely?
Well, not completely, but with my practice here in Princeton.
How many babies over your career, Joe? Do you know?
I'm sure over about 10,000 over that time.
Wow, that's fantastic.
A lot of late nights.
And we're also joined on the phone by Delegate Jimmy Willis, who serves on the Education Committee. Jimmy, you hear us?
Yep, good morning.
Good morning, Jimmy. So, Joe, we were just talking we kind of had an education-based show today. We just got off the phone with Amy Grady talking about the discipline bill that we couldn't get past the finish line last year. From the House perspective, what is your focus going to be this upcoming session, and what are some of the things we can expect out of the Education Committee?
Well, it is pretty broad, and probably will be general on this.
Yeah.
Since we have a new governor coming in, we don't know what his agenda is at this point in time. We'll probably learn more of it over the next month. As you know, constitutionally, the main thing we have to do is come up with a balanced budget this year. So education is a large component of that. It's about a $2 billion part of the budget from the general fund. Mainly the state aid formula is part of that. I think a lot of people realize that is kind of old and antiquated, that has a one-size-fits-all for different things, and we need more flexibility. So we are working on that as something that we'll have discussions over the course of this year and probably next. But we do have to come up with something on that. As you gentlemen know, education involves not only the K-12 part, but higher education, adult education, alternative education, and mainly workforce transition for people coming out of high school into the workforce, and college, also preparing for our workforce. So those are things we've worked on in the past. K-12, we just recently had the Third Grade Success Act. I'm sure Senator Grady may have talked about some of that.
No, we didn't really get into that.
Oh, okay. Well, we're already getting some early data back as far as some progress there. Higher education, we just recently did a funding formula that is probably going to be going into effect within these next couple of years. And then, of course, alternative education, such as with our charter schools, Hope Scholarship, things like that.
So go back to the Third Grade Success Act for a second, Joe. What kind of results, I know we got some reports in the last interim session. What kind of results are we seeing from that Success Act?
You're talking about the Third Grade Success part?
Yes.
Yeah, we just, at our last LOSIA meeting, we did receive some reports that the early testing was showing that they were able to identify children at risk, and we're making some interventions, and then we saw that the numbers were starting to decrease a little bit in the subsequent quarters. So it is a positive trend at the moment. Of course, it just got implemented last year, so we're really into this year and started with it last year. So it's going to probably take at least a full year or two before we see results there. And, of course, that's during the first to third grade part. So... But we have seen some improvement as far as language arts and also with mathematics.
And then I'm going to switch to Jimmy. You and Joe have been working on a lot of vocational style bills or practices. Can you tell us what you're planning there, Jimmy?
Yeah, so I got still got some work to do on a piece of legislation that I'm preparing to put in for the upcoming session that has to do with expanding on some of the work we did in my first session with House Bill 3055 to just expand on the vocational education in the high schools for our students. Like I've said probably a million times now in the last 2 years, college isn't for everybody, and I think we need to continue to do more as a state to focus as much attention on getting kids from high school to the workforce as we do from high school to college.
So, Joe, as a committee chair, how do you manage 25 personalities coming in every year with all these great ideas, and how do you put those all together and kind of become one as a select committee?
Sure. I mean, we have a lot of the bills that are introduced by different members. Also, the governor has his speaker introduce bills on his behalf that they want to do on their agenda. We look at the beginning of the session, there are a number of carryover bills from the previous years that may not have made it across or been considered as in detail. But my committee, we look at different bills, a lot of things that are similar, different topics, and we kind of see what are identical or redundant. We look at the topics and try to figure out what is the best way to approach it. I think this year we're going to look more at discussion and looking at solving problems rather than just individual bills. We'll still have some of those. But my process is where I have my members on the committee caucus with me, where we can discuss openly to each other different topics and see how do we tackle those, what things we need to address, priorities, see if there's input from each of the members, if there's support for something or not. And then we try to hammer out any of the questions that may come up or any unintended consequences that may be of a concern to try to address those ahead of time. And then many times we may have different amendments that we'll work on that we will try to get out of the way before we go to full committee. And then I don't know if the other committees do that, but I usually will meet with members of the minority to find out their concerns and questions about that and see what things they have and then bring them back to my caucus. And then obviously in committee, many times there are bills that we've passed that we didn't have much of a discussion because we've already ironed out a lot of that stuff. And that's not as a lack of transparency to the public, because once you're in committee, you have everyone there as far as all the agencies and witnesses and other people and staff that are there. We just don't want to waste a lot of their time, but we also want to try and iron out most things before we get there. Of course, there are some problems we haven't considered that will be brought up in committee, and that's where the question and answer part comes. But we try to work out most of those things beforehand. And then, of course, once it goes through our committee, it goes to the floor, and you probably entertain other questions and problems. And, of course, to the other chamber and to the governor eventually. So but that's kind of how I work it out in my committee.
I forget which one of you mentioned this, but you said that, this is John, by the way, good morning, that Governor Morrissey hasn't yet shared his agenda. Is that unusual? Shouldn't he have? And do we suspect that education is not going to be a high priority?
Well, no. Education, I'm sure, will be a high priority on his part. But, when we have a new governor, they usually have a month ahead of time. That's why we're going to be starting in February for him to prepare his budget. Now, he may have different ideas of what he wants to do, but the specifics, he hasn't talked to me about that. We did try to reach out to him when he was on the campaign trail just to get an idea of topics he was interested in so that we can sync up with him ahead of time. But I'm sure they had their election they were concerned with, and then now that he's in, the budget is probably going to be a big part. They haven't produced that to us yet. I guess when he does his State of the State address, he will. But that has a big part to do with it, is what his agenda is. I will say, though, with the new executive, that does give us the opportunity to work closer with them as far as determining what the policy may be. So I suspect after we log in next week, over that course of that month will be opportunity to talk with him or his staff and find out what his priorities are and see if we match them up with our priorities.
We discussed in the last segment the failure of Amendment 4 back a couple of years ago, and my theory is nobody nobody rejected Amendment 4 on its merits. They rejected it because they couldn't read it, and that would be myself as well. And Governor Justice was running a campaign that wasn't helpful to the amendment at all. Do you think we'll see that reintroduced?
I don't know if it'll be introduced. It may be. Certain members may do that. I will say the key to that was really oversight on education. That is something I think with if you have the different agencies, the executive and the legislature work closer together, we may be able to get a lot of things done as far as oversight without causing any problems. The way it works now is the legislature will appropriate funding. The executive gives the budget that we have to work within. They're the ones that enforce the law. We can have as many things in code as we would like. However, if the department does not want to do certain things or they just don't report anything, we don't have a lot of oversight on that other than the ability to not necessarily penalize, but say withholding funding for certain things. And in that case, you need the executive to go along with you. But we also need the members of the legislature, both House and Senate, to work together on that too. So I think that could be more cooperation. But the other thing is if we change the structure of our meetings a little bit, that we're trying to solve problems and we have the agencies come to us for account, they may present what they've been doing, and then that will be public discourse there that they can say, hey, we're doing this or we're not doing this, and then that's where they may have to face up to the public of why they're not doing it. But again, some changes may occur without having to do legislation, and that's sort of what we're looking at. But back to that Amendment 4, sure, it may resurface. That's not on my agenda at the moment, but I think the cooperation with the new executive and getting agencies more involved in our public meetings instead of just running bills through the meetings, that's going to be something that might make some change.
So it seems, from where I sit and from talking to people, that the State Board of Education has an enormous amount of power in West Virginia. Does that flow directly from the Constitution? What would it take if this were desired? What would it take to change, limit, rejigger the powers of the State Board and to push it farther down into the individual counties?
Amendment 4.
No, that was oversight. That didn't actually shift the...
Right. I mean, it would take, from the legislative standpoint, it would take a constitutional amendment like Amendment 4 to change the powers for oversight from the executive. But now the executive does appoint the State Board. But that is, when they have vacancies, that's when they appoint new members. It depends on who the governor would be at that time. We don't have any control over that. The State Board does have control over the county boards. And then, of course, the State Department is supposed to have some oversight, but that's limited. But it depends on how much power they have as far as oversight over their county boards. We don't have oversight on that. We can request things, but they don't necessarily have to report that to us. From a legislative standpoint.
From looking back to last session, what bills do you have within the Education Committee that maybe didn't make it through to the finish line, but that you will be reintroducing that your committee has been working on?
Well, we're going to have some cleanup bills on things because obviously whenever you do something, sometime down the road you start finding out some unintended consequences or little things that have to change in code. Biggest things that I think we're going to be working on is going to be security in the schools. I know my Senate counterpart talked about discipline and truancy part. That's something we will probably be revisiting, but they'll be introduced from their side. But security is something that we've had on there. I think we're going to be looking at broader topics on that. We did have the teacher carry bill that Doug Smith had promoted. I think that's been changed many times to try to meet most people's problems with anything. So that's one that we're probably looking at. Another thing I think that's going to come up, I don't have a specific bill on it, but the sports with the WVSSAC transfer concerns. Now we will probably have 2 years of data to look at. I suspect that's going to be something that a number of members are going to bring up. But as far as answering your question about specific bills that I'm planning on doing, I think it's going to morph on different things there. But security is something that's going to be a big topic. I know there's going to be a concern about consolidation of districts because of all the school closings. But that's not something that I have pushed ahead at this point. Our workforce part is what Jimmy mentioned was something that we were looking at. Shortages in all of our districts as far as social workers, aides, nursing, bus drivers, things like that, and how can we work on that. And then, of course, with as we had with the K-3 part, with progress that we've been noting, one of the big concerns I've had that I am looking at is in sixth grade, math scores were not very good, and that's where I saw a problem with transition for those kids going into high school eventually. And that's an emphasis that I personally have, that you probably will see something coming up there.
What percentage of West Virginia students who enter high school complete high school? Do we know?
Oh, Lord, I don't have those numbers at my point, but I know we have a small percentage. You're probably talking about a quarter of students are going on to higher ed in some form or another. We've tried to improve the traditional four-year colleges. I don't have the number on that, but it's probably about a quarter. It's going into our trade schools as far as community and schools and getting certificates. We've tried to improve that, so you have more numbers there. I think there's been more of an emphasis to try to get people not to go to the traditional four-year colleges, or not only to go to that, but they have the opportunity to go to that. We want that. But we're looking at some want to just do trades, learn different things as far as welding or electricity or plumbing, and then go on to jobs that the state needs there. But those numbers seem to be increasing as far as the trades part. The four-year colleges have been seeing a decrease in enrollment, but then we have a decrease in enrollment in our K-12 part too. Probably about 14% of that graduated, around 250,000 students or so. But no, I don't have the exact numbers at hand right here to tell you.
Joe, what do you see, and Joe or Jimmy, why do you think that we have such decreasing enrollment in our four-year institutions at staggering rates? Like, I believe the last time we got a report was 20% decreases in enrollment. Either one of you.
From my perspective, I think a big part of it is it's just gotten so expensive. And for me, use me as an example, I was a political science major, and they required me to take classes that had nothing to do with political science. Somewhere along the way, college that was supposed to be a tailored education to a specific specialty that you wanted became a broad education like high school had. And I think that's what makes even the vocational schools more attractive to students, where they go there to learn how to weld. They focus on welding, where now in the colleges, you're forced to take all these different classes basically to subsidize the programs in the schools that aren't making money, in my opinion.
I don't think it's a West Virginia problem, is it? I think it's across the board.
No, absolutely.
Well, absolutely. It's all across the country, and I think that you're seeing it across the country. There were several articles I read last month, in the last few months, that talked about how my generation has become the tool belt generation because they just don't go to college, but the vocational schools, they're cheaper. And I know in West Virginia, community college is free to students from West Virginia. And it's just, you can do something like that, 2 years, 20 years old, you can go get into the trades and be making $100,000 plus a year. Or you could go to college, get saddled with $100,000 worth of debt, and make half that in some of the instances.
Well, I have a theory on this. I'm not the one being interviewed, but I do have a theory on this. I think that we have, across the country, made college a lot less rewarding experience. And I mean, just don't mean financially. I actually am a big believer in the liberal arts, and I think that going to college and learning about history and philosophy and all, I think there's value to that. But now you can't talk about it. I think the problem now, there's so much pressure on kids to only say the right thing and only think the right thoughts that it's a very difficult and unfun place to be. And I think that has a big draw on it.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was in college just several years ago as a political science student, obviously we debated a lot about politics. And I can say being the Republican, conservative, pro-Trump minded student in the classroom wasn't the most popular thing to be. And I was kind of in the minority like the Democrats are in the state legislature these days with my opinion. And it does seem that critical thinking, which is the key to a higher education, especially in the liberal arts, has been taken off a lot of our college campuses, unfortunately, with the left-wing ideology that's being peddled most of the time by most of the faculty and most of the students.
Well, Joe and Jimmy, I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to serving with you this upcoming session. Thank you for your time, and we're going to take a break here. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, guys.